Okay, welcome everybody to today's webinar. We're very excited to have you all join us today for this webinar on utilizing workspaces for teaching. My name is Anita Brollox and I'm the head of outreach here at Protocols.io. And I'm also very excited to have a special guest joining us for this webinar today, Dr. Bonnie Herrod from the University of Arizona. And before we get started, just a couple quick notes. We are recording this webinar, so just please be aware of that, and you'll receive a recording, a link to the recording afterwards in your inbox. And we did reserve a slot at the end of the webinar for any questions that you might have. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to put them into the Q&A window, the Q&A section here on Zoom. You should see a button on the bottom of your Zoom screen that has two little speech bubbles and it says Q&A. So that's the place to put any questions, and we will have time to address any questions at the end. So let's get started. Our agenda for today's webinar is first, I will be giving an introduction and an overview of features that could be used for teaching. And then afterwards, Dr. Bonnie Herrod will be talking about her experience using Protocols.io for teaching, because she actually is using it. And then at the end, as I mentioned, we will have time for questions. So please put any questions into the Q&A. And I just want to start off with just pointing out a couple of teaching challenges that I think a lot of people who are teaching right now are facing. And one is, of course, with the coronavirus situation, a lot of teaching has actually transferred to online. So it's all remote, but some is still happening in person. So you're kind of like in this difficult situation where it's a mixture of like remote or in person, or you have to be ready really for any kind of scenario. And also a challenge that comes with it is like the distribution of class materials. How do you keep students engaged when everything is remote? How do you really organize yourselves and the students? And how do you provide resources for students, even if classes take place online and people cannot really be there physically? And Protocols.io really is a platform that can provide a lot of features for remote and in-person teaching. And right now here on the screen, you see it says My Protocol, but really it's a secure platform for developing and sharing reproducible methods and protocols, but also really any other documents. So if you have documents, you can share that as well. And in this webinar today, we just want to highlight a couple key insights and functionalities that could really help you to really structure your class. And for one, we have functionality that allows you to provide resources for students. You can easily create and share class materials very efficiently. The Protocols.io workspaces can also really enable teamwork and communication. And you can, with the workspaces, it kind of is like a virtual classroom where you can really keep all the class material in one central and secure place. And if you do use the workspaces for your classes, it can really save you a lot of time and keep everybody's work organized. And the Protocols.io workspaces are really applicable for many different fields. So whether you're having any lab students and maybe you want to do at-home lab experiments or something, it's totally great for that. Or also if you have any computational classes that you're teaching, it's great for computational work. Or maybe there's any field classes or field trips, things that you can create protocols for the students. And it works for whether you're doing it in person or remote. So it's really great for a lot of different fields, and it really helps everybody to stay organized and know what's going on, regardless if it's in person or virtual. And I would just quickly like to touch on the three key elements of Protocols.io, which are our file manager, workspaces, and the editor. And I would like to start off with workspaces, which really are or can be your virtual classroom. So the workspaces are really great because it provides you a central place and a secure location where everybody can meet virtually, and you can share protocols, documents, files, resources, and you can also start discussions. And it really is a great place to also collaborate with others. So you can really add a lot of things here and really keep students engaged. The next is our editor. This is where you can actively create content. So you can create step-by-step instructions for students, but also the students can use it for creating documents. And the editor really has a lot of flexibility. So you can really, instead of like just having a static PDFs with tasks, you can really create these like step-by-step instructions that are easy for students to follow. You can group different steps into sections and also add like components that make it visually nice and really easy to follow. Another great feature of the editor is that you can include images and videos. So those are really great for just explaining things, and they can really add a lot of value to it. And also the editor does come with concurrent editing. So if students are working on things together in a team, they can all work on the same document together. And another feature that I will show a little bit later is our run functionality. So students can actually click run on every protocol, and that gives them like a step-by-step checklist where they can check off every single step as they complete it. And then they get like an experiment or like a run record where they can then really make their own notes and keep that as a record. And then the last functionality that I want to mention here is that we do have commenting. So if the student has any question on a particular step of the task, for example, they could leave a comment, and then you will receive a notification that there was a comment added, and then the discussion really can happen right there on the material. And this is what the protocols or documents really look like. So as I mentioned, these are not static PDFs. These are interactive and dynamic protocols. So here on the left-hand side, you can see it's like an instruction step-by-step. And then you can see there's an image added. And on the right-hand side, there is a comment. So you can really add comments on either a protocol level or on a step level. So if somebody has a question on this particular step 1, they can leave a question here. And then here on the right-hand side, this is what the documents look like. And here you can see, for example, even if you have online classes and you're recording it, you could even upload them afterwards to YouTube and then add the video here. And then if somebody missed it, they can watch it afterwards again. So there's really a lot of flexibility what you can do with the protocols and documents. Another great feature is that if you create a protocol for students and maybe there's a couple of things that were not clear and you need to optimize it, you can always create new versions of protocols. So if you are, if there's any changes you need to make, you can always update them, and everybody who has the link to the protocol, if they have the link, for example, to version 1 and there's now a version 2 that they should be using, they will get a little pop-up that tells them, hey, just to let you know, there's this new version of the protocol available. So that way students always know what version of a protocol to use for tasks. And then here's just a quick little video showing the running functionality that I mentioned. And this is really great because it gives students the ability to really check off every step as they complete it. And if they have any notes that they want to add, they can add notes. And then in the end, when they're done with the task, they can save it, and then they have a record of that specific task. And I also wanted to quickly mention our task manager for Workspaces. And this is really great because if you are assigning tasks to students, or if you just want to highlight when different lectures are taking place or things like that, this is really a great option for you to really put everything that the students need to know when stuff is happening into here. And you can like color code it however you like it. But this is really a great way to keep everyone informed about what's happening in your remote class or in an in-person class. And then the last element is our file manager. The file manager is really where everything happens. And this is where you can also organize the class materials. You can create different, just like in any other file manager, you can create different folders and subfolders and really just structure it in a way that you need it for your class. It also, as I mentioned in the beginning, it supports any file type. So if you have any PDFs, or if you have any other files like spreadsheets or anything like that, you can add them into the file manager too. So it's not only the protocols.io protocols and documents, it's really for any other file type. And really from the file manager, you can do anything that you might need to possibly do with a protocol or document. You can archive, you can audit, you can export. There's really a lot of things you can do in the file manager, and the file managers do come with enterprise grade security and backup functionality. So if you ever need to get class material out, you can really export everything with literally the click of a button. You can also sync up with Dropbox, Google Drive, OneDrive, or Box, and really just back up all your files. And with that, I would like to just mention that there are a lot of organizations right now encouraging the use of protocols.io. That includes journals and publishers, funders, but also what's very exciting is more and more institutions, they're getting campus-wide licenses for just more reproducible research and publications, but also to enable really great teaching and like really give instructors the opportunity to create workspaces for specifically teaching on campus in these difficult times. And with that, I'm at the end of my section, and now I'm very excited to introduce Dr. Bonnie Herrod. Dr. Bonnie Herrod, she's an associate professor of biosystems and engineering at the University of Arizona. She has worked as a computational biologist for nearly 2 decades on interdisciplinary projects in both industry and academia. Her research on the earth and human microbiome incorporate large-scale omics data sets, high throughput computing, and big data analytics to answer questions in systems biology. A core focus of her lab is in developing bioinformatics algorithms and cyber infrastructure for microbial ecology. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to Bonnie.
Thank you so much, Anita. I think that was such a fabulous presentation, and I have to say that I'm really excited to use some of those new features for protocols.io in my own classes. So today I'm going to give you guys a real-world demonstration of how we're using protocols.io and really how we've been using it over the last 3 years or so for developing coursework and really trying to make our coursework more open and available to the public domain. The work I'm going to talk about today was developed by myself, Ken Ewens-Clark, Dr. Elise Poncero, and also Dr. Jana Uren. So I just want to acknowledge them before we jump in. So today, one of the things that we've really realized is that having data available open source to the world is really important for doing interdisciplinary science. And in particular, we've come up with these FAIR guiding principles that many of us have heard about. So making sure data are findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. But we oftentimes forget that in order to do that, we have to have very robust protocols behind how that work and how those data were developed. So I'm going to talk today about using protocols.io for teaching and actually trying to teach the next generation of scientists how to do that. And in particular, I have 3 different vignettes that I'm going to go through. The first one is really for how we're using protocols.io to basically onboard students, get them used to using different tools and resources. And in particular, I'm going to be talking about a class we have called Biosystems Analytics. And then also, I'm going to introduce you to how we're actually showing students how to demystify the world of bioinformatics by using step-by-step protocols for how to run different bioinformatics analyses. And then finally, I'm going to talk about a class that is currently in development that we're running for the first time this semester. And that class is really focused on reproducible protocols and teaching undergraduates how to actually understand and define what reproducible research is, and then do a research project of their own, which will then be implemented in protocols.io for future generations. So let's go ahead and jump in. So starting with Biosystems Analytics. So what this course is a class that is meant to teach biologists and people that are unfamiliar with computer science and coding in particular, how to use Python and different shell scripting languages as well, to really start to do analysis on a lot of large-scale data sets that they work with. And in particular, one of the things that we have to do is get students on board with using our campus high-performance computing resources. And so there are a number of steps that are involved in that. And rather than having to go through that every year with students bit by bit, what we've done is we've developed a reproducible protocol that allows students to go step by step through that process, but also see any challenges or issues that other students might have faced, so that they can deal with different situations according to which kind of computer they have, or do they have the right browser, etc., for accessing those resources. So this particular class, really we do a few things that are interesting. One, we use the high performance computing cluster, but also we're teaching our students how to use GitHub for uploading their code and downloading code from us, for learning how to program and learning how to be good members of the community by making all of their code available to the world. So we also need to teach our students how to clone and access a GitHub repository, which also has a number of steps. And in particular, this class is really interactive because we use not only protocols for understanding and onboarding people with these different tools, but we interlink that with outside resources such as GitHub for assignments, exercises, and extras, but also link out to YouTube for different 5-minute instructional videos on how to write and test a Python program and all the different aspects of the course that we're teaching. So it's really a great resource for doing something that we call evergreening, which means making a course that can be reused over and over in time. We also use protocols.io for metagenomics. And one of the things that we found is that trying to teach students how to use different complicated bioinformatics pipelines is pretty tough. So not only do they need to understand the ideas and theoretical components behind it, but they need to have the different command line functions that they're using. Sometimes they type things wrong. They need example data sets. They really need to be able to go through a given workthrough with that sample data before they ever dive in with the much larger and more complex data sets that we work with in this class, that are associated with real world metagenomics sequencing projects. So in this class, what we do is we have different protocols that are essentially parts of their homework, where they get to go through these protocols and work with these example data sets bit by bit. And we can see, for example, real-time comments from the students really struggling with, I don't understand how to remove human DNA, for example. And then you'll see our comments in real time back to those students. We also have interactive videos for using different tools that are available as web-based online bioinformatics tools. We have these example data sets, and what that does, it gives them all of the components that they need for very quickly going through the protocols and getting results that they know are verified, and then they can dive in with all of their own work. So I went and got a quote from one of our former students. His name is Corey Von Keith, and he's a graduate student at the University of Arizona. And this is him with his dog. And what they're doing, and what he said about using protocols.io is that he really enjoyed the interactive nature of protocols.io. He liked how we were really integrating with the outside resources. So very much like Anita said, we're integrating everything in one place. So it's very easy to follow, and the students have these step-by-step instructions, so they cannot falter. So we're really trying to give them all of those resources in one place. Finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about how we're using protocols.io currently for trying to teach students about reproducibility and reproducible research. So one of the things that sadly has happened is that as we start to examine the scientific literature, we find that some science is simply fabricated or false. And so there was a recent article in PLOS ONE that really looked at this issue and noted that about 1 to 2% of scientists that are surveyed actually admitted to falsifying data, and then even more scientists admitted to misconduct, such as dropping data points that didn't really match the kind of criteria that they were expecting. So how do we as a scientific community go about trying to eradicate this kind of problem that exists within science? So one way we can do that is by training our next generation of researchers that their data and their science and their protocols in particular all need to be open and available so that we can review those over time, and we can reproduce that research. So we are, with Dr. Elise Poncero, we're developing a class that's called a CURE, and it's a course-based undergraduate research class. So the students in the class get the opportunity to do research projects to try to quantify and define what is reproducibility in the scientific literature. And as part of that class, they're developing protocols in protocols.io that will walk future students through exactly what they did for their analyses. And so taken together, this really is a fabulous way to teach students about reproducibility in research, to model good practices, and also to really help take a lot of these complicated processes and break them down in a way that's easy to communicate and pass on to future generations. And most importantly, for anybody who is teaching, it allows you to really use that year after year and create these courses that will be important over time, that you can also continue to develop and fork protocols and make them even better as you go. So, so just to recap, some of the things that I think are really important about using protocols, in addition to what Anita described, is that it's great for getting started with research. I love the interactive videos we can create, literally just walking students through these demos and them hearing our own voices describing the processes. I think having the example data sets and real-time feedback has been just absolutely invaluable because we can address problems as they come up. And then finally, really demonstrating our best practices through these protocols is important for open science and for us moving forward. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to questions. Thanks, Anita.
Great, thank you so much, Bonnie. And let's see, we also have Alex from the protocols.io team here, and Alex will be helping us with questions.
Great, so I can go ahead and get started. One of the first questions coming from Prasanna, she asks, what are the advantages of using protocols.io when I have a GitHub wiki or I guess any other type of wiki system?
So do you want to go ahead and jump in?
You can go ahead.
Okay, so I can say that, I mean, I absolutely love GitHub, and it's a fabulous resource. One of the things that I really like about protocols is that it's that ability for the students to annotate on top of those protocols. That is really important because they use that feature, whereas the GitHub wiki is more of like a static resource. It's like here's our document, here's how we go through a given analysis. But using protocols is a lot more dynamic, and then adds that capacity for students to have communication about a given protocol. Anita, do you have any thoughts about that?
Right. No, I think you've mentioned all the important things. Yeah, I think it's just if you do use protocols.io, it really just allows you to capture all these important details for the analysis. For example, like the parameters that you need and like where are the data sets located and all these kind of things. And I think also the running functionality that you saw, it does really allow people to really follow these individual steps, and really, as an instructor, you can support if people get stuck on a particular step, and then you know exactly where they were.
Exactly. And it gives the students to support to help each other. So they'll actually see the responses from other students saying, oh, I had that problem too. I fixed it by doing X. So sometimes it saves me time going in and fixing that. So I think that's also a great part of it.
Great. So we have two questions that are kind of coming in alignment, one from Jung Yoon and one from Susan. Jung Yoon asks, as an instructor, how can we use protocols.io? Is it subscribed by the school or by the individual instructor? And that kind of blends in with Susan's question, who asks, do you need a paid account to use all of the features you mentioned?
Great. I can answer that one. So everything that's open, as I think Bonnie, you're doing everything open, right? So that's all
Yes.
free.
Yeah.
Only if you decide to keep things private. So if you don't want to make your things open, then you would have to pay for it. But as I mentioned, there are a lot of institutions that do have campus-wide licenses. So if your institution does have a campus-wide license, you can keep things private, but everything that's open is always free. So it really depends on if you're planning to make your class content open to the public, or if you want to only make it accessible for your students and not make it open. But
And
yeah.
I personally make everything open, so it works fine for me in that regard. But absolutely, as you're developing a protocol, you want to definitely have that be private until, you know, then you publish it and make it open. And then if you need to revise it, then you fork it. And then, so like this happens all the time to us, you know, where all of a sudden we have a new campus HBC. I have to give a new protocol to really how to use that new resource. And so I'll just fork the old one, fix them and make any adjustments, and then publish that. And so it becomes a pretty fluid process.
Great. We have another question here. Will students be willing to openly share all of their data?
So I think that for the most part, students are, in our class, are working with example data sets, and we do that on purpose because we really like to, well, first of all, it helps us continue to reuse the same material year after year, because we know the problems and issues that are associated with those data sets. And in fact, we try to actually give the students real problems that can happen when that they can see in the data. So we actually spike in bad data like on purpose. And so we like to have that kind of control of using very specific data sets and very small data sets. But absolutely, we do also work with students on their own data. Those data would not be embedded in a protocol. And if you're working with a given student on their research project, if you don't want to make data available openly, like let's say it's something that you're actively working on, you'd want to keep that in a private domain until you're ready to publish it. At least that's our experience.
Great. We have a few questions that are coming in from Harley, but one of them is actually related to another question from Prasanna. So Prasanna asks, are all of the protocols submitted public, or can you have private groups as well? And that kind of bleeds into a series of questions from Harley, which I'll get to after we answer this one.
Okay, great. So yeah, you can, as I mentioned before, you can keep them private and you can make them public. So every time you create a new protocol, it actually starts out private, and then it's really up to you when you're ready to make it public, or if you even make it public. And the same for workspaces. When you're setting up a workspace, we will ask you if you would like to make your workspace visible or invisible, which really means public or not public, so hidden. So depending on what you select, your workspace will either be visible to the outside world, or it will be hidden from the outside world. And it's really up to you what you need for your class. But there's a lot of flexibility there, and you can, the same way you can choose for your protocols to make them open like Bonnie does, or you can keep them private. So it's really up to you.
Yeah, and I would say that there's a lot of benefits with having them open. So for example, a lot of the material that I develop for my courses has to sit behind the University of Arizona D2L site, or Desire to Learn. And that's both good and bad. It's good because it's sort of this, paid resource that students are, getting. But it's bad because it doesn't really enable other professors around the world to reuse some of this content, to build content, for the community, which is really more of what I am interested in doing. And then it also helps to, build yourself as a teacher, as a researcher, by showing the ways that you can use data and protocols. And so I think it's really important to actually have it open. And so for me, the Workspaces is really a nice alignment with what I have to do in D2L. For example, I can actually take that content and make it public using the Workspaces, at least the pieces that I would like to.
Great. We have 2 more questions related to the platform from Harley. And Harley, if you need more clarification on your question 1, feel free to add more into the chat. But the 2 other questions are related to the number of protocols. She asks, 5 protocols is limiting with a class of 14 labs. Do each of my 48 students need to pay that $35 monthly fee to use Protocols.io? And then a follow-up, I've invited students using the invite colleagues link, but I don't see any students. And what has happened? So maybe this is directed towards Anita.
Right. So so if you like to add people, if you like to add the students to your workspace, you actually have to go into the workspace, and it says there's like a manage members button, and that's where you invite the colleagues. I think it sounds like the invite colleagues might have been, it's like a feature where you can invite colleagues so you can get more private protocols, and you might have done that. But if you can send me an email to just anita@protocols.io with your questions, again, I'm happy to provide you, I'll send you like a tutorial on how to add the people to specific workspaces.
Great. And I should note that we also do have academic pricing, so it brings that monthly fee down, and you can check that out on the protocols.io/plans page. And yeah, as Anita mentioned, the invite colleagues is kind of inviting them to the platform itself, but not necessarily your workspace. And I think that's it for questions. If anybody has any additional questions, feel free to put them in the QA or the chat section.
And I think we're a little bit over time already as well. So, but this was really great. Thank you so much for all the questions. And thank you, Bonnie, for joining. And thank you, Alex, for helping out with the questions. And if you have any questions later on, feel free to always send me an email at anita@protocols.io, or you can also send emails to info@protocols.io, and we'd be happy to answer any other questions that you have. And I think Bonnie also just put her address into the chat. So feel free to reach out if you have any additional questions. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.